Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd, fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this session, we're looking now at ayah number 59 from Surah Baqarah, which continues the story of the Bani Israel. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. فبدل الذين ظلموا قولا غير الذي قيل لهم فأنزلنا على الذين ظلموا رجزا من السماء بما كانوا يفسقون. صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in translation, but those who wronged changed those words to a statement other than that which had been said to them. So we sent down upon those who wronged a punishment from the sky because they were defiantly disobeying. So this ayah follows in the tradition of the last two ayahs, particularly where the Bani Israel were allowed to go into a particular place, a particular city, and they could live there. And for once now they were out of the desert, and they could now have a structured society around them, and they could meet other people, and they had food in abundance, and they had the environment, the circumstances of abundance. So I discussed this previously about life in a city and the abundance of a city and the dangers of living in a city that we tend to weaken in our tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, all of that at the same time was giving the city in a positive light. This ayah now comes along and gives us a different aspect now to city life. And here we look at, in particular, the word that was given to the Bani Israel, which was hitta, which I discussed earlier. And in reference to ourselves, hitta being given a word that says or expresses shukr, gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that we should give shukr and gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while we live in the cities by using the words of the sunnah, which are plentiful in shukr, in gratitude to Allah Ta'ala, and everything that we have, that we eat, drink, wear clothes, etc., sleeping, waking up, and so on. Now what I want to look at is something a little bit further to that the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying they changed it, but those who wronged changed those words. So there were people amongst them, this was not all of them, there was a number of people amongst them, as there always are, in any group, any civilization, any community, that are upon evil, that are being taken by the shayateen. So amongst the Bani Israel, there were such people, and they changed the word. So instead of saying hitta, they made some other words, or they made something that sounds similar, but it had a different meaning. In any case, the point being that they changed that word. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing that out. So let's have a look at that. Bani Israel are allowed to live in a city where they'll be able to eat, drink, and live comfortably, but on condition to their being humble and making the du'as given to them. In this particular case, this word, hitta. However, a group changed that word, and this spread amongst the tribes. See, once this group had initially done its damage, it then became common. Over time, everybody started to say the same word, not realizing it perhaps, or unknowingly, but the point being that this word that was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed to another word that was corrupted by this group of people. And over time, the entire community were now saying the corrupted word and no longer saying the words given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So after a time, Allah ta'ala sent a punishment to the Bani Israel of a plague. And this plague killed over 70,000 of them. So when this plague came into the city, now, the Bani Israel were there, but obviously the inhabitants of the city were there. So this plague was there for everybody. And it came down upon the people, and the Bani Israel were infected by it, and the people of the city were affected by it. Everybody was, so the city was in some kind of, quarantine, and everybody within that city was infected, or a majority were infected. As for the Bani Israel, over 70,000 of them were infected. That does not mean all of them. There was more than that. However, this was a large number, a large percentage of them. And again, why? We don't understand from the fact that they changed this word. And this is part of the the nature of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many times the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes upon people and it gets everybody. All right, it can be something that's like an earthquake, a volcano, a tornado, a flood, something that is vast, and majority of the people in that area, there will be survivors, but the majority of people are swept through by this punishment. And that's what happened in this case. 70,000 of the Bani Israel plus countless numbers of the inhabitants of the city were all taken by this plague, this disease, this illness that became a pandemic in the city and destroyed so many lives. And as a result of this, the Bani Israel, their numbers were reduced, but they understood what was happening. They had changed the word given to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as a result of which the punishment came. So that's the crux of the lesson with respect to the understanding of this ayah and its background. What I want to look at now again is the lessons for us. So we can see this small snippet, this window of events amongst the Bani Israel. So we've looked at the situation where they came into the city and the benefits of living in the city. We've looked at all of that. But now I want to look at what happened when things went wrong. And that what went wrong was almost from the beginning. As we mentioned in the previous ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them particular dua. They didn't continue with that dua, they changed the word. As for us, the principal lesson here is that whatever words are from Allah Ta'ala not only must be recited, but must remain intact and unchanged. For us now, this begins with Quran and then the Hadith. Now, I mentioned and spoken about Hadith, the du'as of Sunnah in the previous ayah, so I'm not going to go into that too much. I want to now focus on the Quran, because this is the ultimate word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just as the Bani Israel, living in their abundance, were given something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to maintain in their daily adhkar, so are we. We are given the Quran. And it's important to note that the Quran given to us is our adhkar, it is our remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, it is our dhikr. And that dhikr, the highest form of dhikr, is the Quran. There are other forms, kalimas, du'as, etc., but this is the highest form. And it must remain as it is. It must be recited, it must remain intact, and it must remain unchanged. Now, when I say unchanged, that doesn't mean that there's a chance of anybody changing the Quran in the Arabic, the original, what was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, that's out of the question. It's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that changed in the sense that how we recite it, perhaps, that we recite it without tajweed, or we recite it without attention or focus, or we read it and do not pay attention to it. Those sorts of things. In that manner, it's almost like, as for the Bani Israel, the original word was changed from another word. So even though they said the word with due diligence, it didn't matter anymore because the original word was lost. And the new word, however due diligence they gave to it, it didn't matter. It wasn't the right word. It wasn't the word that was given to them. Same with us. If we recite the Quran without tajweed, it's not the Quran. It's not the Quran that was given. We are now actually committing a sin because we are reciting Quran without its true, without the true recitations of each and every individual letters, right? And that's what tajweed focuses on. Every single letter has what's called a makhraj, a point of origin from the mouth where it must be pronounced. So then we put that together and it becomes words. We put that together, it becomes the ayat, and the sounds must be correct. So if we lose that, we are not really reciting Quran. And then the next thing is that if it's not in obedience, we are not remaining in obedience to the Quran, then the Quran is lost to us as well. Because the Quran is hidayah, it's guidance, and guidance has to be followed. Guidance has to be practiced, implemented, and then you will get the benefit from it. Otherwise, you remain lost, even though you have the solution. It's like having a map and not using it and continuing aimlessly wandering around the land trying to find your way. And you have the map. So this is where we could be. So we must remain humble, we must recite du'as and do so with the authentic words. A lot of this has changed amongst us, amongst the Muslim community. Partly it's to do with culture and the contamination of culture, partly it's to do with misunderstanding, and partly it's to do with deviant sects that have brought in wrong teachings, deviant teachings that have caused problems for the rest of the Muslims. So we have a mixed batch of problems, and we need to be able to understand the Quran in its original form, recite it in its original form, understand it in its classical form, and then Look at its meaning for us today in the modern day and age that we find ourselves in. But all of this based upon the reality, the authentic aspects of the Quran, whether it's the understanding, whether it's the recitation. With respect to du'as, I've spoken about that in the previous session, the sunnah du'as that give us the ability to give shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for the humbleness, this was again something that was given to the Bani Israel, enter the city bowing. For us, humbleness. For them, humbleness too, but that action represented humbleness for them. For us, we don't need to bow when we come into any city. We don't do that. It's not asked or required of us. But the state of humility, living in a place of abundance, is very important, because when you don't have that, then as I mentioned previously, you lose the shukr to Allah Ta'ala, the gratitude, and you lose the tawakkul, the reliance and dependence upon Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, because you believe that the means around you are what brings the food, the clothing, the safety, the comforts, the resources, the luxuries to you, when it's actually the decree of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So if this doesn't happen, if we lose it, then the punishment of Allah Ta'ala may descend upon us in our city lives too. So here we are in comfort, but for how long? And as happened in other nations and civilizations of the past, they were given comfort, they were given abundance as a whole nation, as a whole civilization, forget just a city. However, when they forgot where it all came from over time, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ghadab, adhab came upon them. And that seems to be the pattern throughout human history. We are given, we forget who gave, and then the punishment comes, and what we are given is taken away from us. Here we are living in cities. Here we are living in with plenty around us. And many of us have already forgotten. We don't make du'as. We're not humble. We take everything for granted, as I mentioned previously. So what follows that? If we remember the pattern, the punishment follows that. And that's the thing we need to be concerned about. So now this does not mean that this is the only reason, but it may be the underlying cause. So our unappreciation, our ungratefulness will be an underlying cause as to the beginnings and the comings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment. In fact, we actually attract it, we call it upon ourselves when we are ungrateful, when we are neglectful, when we forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we forget Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's sunnah. Look at his example. The greatest being, the greatest human being ever lived on earth. He had the highest maqam, the highest place in Jannah, which is Jannat al-Firdaus, and the highest place in Jannat al-Firdaus is his domain. Yet he maintains his ibadah, he maintains his humility, he maintains his tawakkul, he maintains his taqwa to the highest at every moment of every day, in every single dealing, whether it's dealing with his wives, whether it's dealing with his children, whether it's dealing with his friends, whether it's dealing with his family, whether it's dealing with his enemies. He maintains the highest level at every aspect. He doesn't need to. He's guaranteed Jannah at the highest, but he remains grateful in the highest of senses. So that remains for us the example and the greatest of example. We have things around us. We may not have as much as we want, but what we have is more than enough for us, and we should be grateful for what we have, because Allah Ta'ala owes us actually nothing. He created us. That's enough. We exist. We live. That's enough. That's the biggest gift of all, to be alive, to be conscious, to be aware, to exist in this world. But beyond that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us food, drink, clothing, etc. And those, especially of us who live in cities and have so much abundance and have grown up with that, with all the comforts and so on, certainly we should remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the giver of these things. And if you have forgotten, we need to remember quickly, because what is coming is going to be very severe. Now, the main word given to us, as was the word for the Bani Israel, as I mentioned, Kalam Allah is the Quran. Kalam Allah, word of Allah. So the word given to us is the word of Allah, which is a comprehensive text of the Quran. But how well do we know it? How well do we study it? How much? How much do we recite it? And how often do we obey it? These are the sorts of questions we need to ask ourselves seriously. Because when the punishment of Allah Ta'ala comes, and it will, It's not a matter of when or will it or will it not. It's not a matter of if at all anymore. If we look at the patterns of all previous civilizations, that's what happened to them. They're no longer here. And Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran, travel through the earth. Go have a look at what happened to previous nations. Not because we want to know that what happened to them and that's it. No, because what happened to them, if we follow the same pattern, will happen to us. We are being taught that lesson. And we are being told, ordered practically in the Quran, to go have a look at those nations, ancient civilizations, etc. And we are no different to them. They were a civilization. We are a civilization. They felt that they had everything. We feel we have everything. They felt they would live forever. We feel like we're going to live forever. We do not think this modern civilization is ever going to end. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, not only the modern civilization, the entire world, this planet will end. On the day when the Qiyamah starts, when the end of the world happens, when the trumpet is blown, all of it will come to an end. Nothing will remain then. No survivors. So we need to look at the Quran and ask ourselves these hard questions. How well do we know it? How much do we recite it? How often do we obey it? These are the questions that are important for us to ask for ourselves, to give ourselves tarbiyah, to condition our nafs, to condition our hearts and minds, to be able to change, to make that change. Because if we don't, the inevitable will still happen. And it is inevitable that the punishment of Allah Ta'ala will come over us. Over time, we have become distant from this kalam Allah. Over time, as a result of living in comforts and luxuries, we have become distant from the kalam Allah. We are not sent to this world for comforts and luxuries. We're not sent to this world to enjoy ourselves. That's Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that. That's Jannah. He hasn't said don't have it by all means, have it, enjoyment, etc. But in Jannah, that's unrestricted, unlimited enjoyment. Here in this dunya, you have to be mindful of what we are doing. We have to be mindful of the fact that death will come. We have to be mindful that we have a purpose here. In Jannah, it's okay. Now you can relax. You are not given to have any particular purpose now because there is no qiyamah, there is no end. But here in the dunya there is. We have been sent for a particular purpose, which is to achieve Jannah. In Jannah, you achieved it. There is no further purpose. There is no further Jannah to achieve from the Jannah that we'll go to, inshallah. But here in the dunya, no, we are told this is not forever. We are told this is not our abode. We are told we are supposed to go forward to Jannah. We are told to earn Jannah in this dunya. And we're not going to do it. We become distant from the kalam Allah, the very word of Allah, which has been given to us to guide us in order to get that achievement of Jannah. So how have we changed the word of kalam Allah, the word of Allah Ta'ala? We recite it, but do not understand or obey it. That is the conclusion, really. We recite it, but do not understand or obey it. And even the recitation, as I mentioned previously, is lacking in its correct recitation. We do not take the effort and time to learn the correct recitation of the words of Allah Ta'ala. And then we wonder why the sakina is not with us, why we do not feel the peace, why we do not feel that connection, why our hearts are not moved, because we're not reciting it correctly. And then secondly, from that, we question why we're not getting the guidance, why our life is not changing, why we are not becoming better, because we're not obeying the Quran. We're not understanding it as it should be understood. We're not obeying it as it should be obeyed. If we go back to what I said at the beginning of Surah Baqarah, the keys to the Quran, those keys are essential. And time again, I'll remind us about this. Those keys are essential. The first three letters, Alif, Lam, Mim, the silencing of the mind. The fact that this is a book without doubt, the removal of those things that we want to argue about, or we want to say, well, that's not for me, that's for somebody else, or that's for them and it's not for this time period. No, the removal of that. The fact that it's guidance, everything we see in it and reading it is guidance for us. It will guide us. It will guide us whether we understand it or not. It is hidayah. It reaches us if we open our hearts to it. And the fact that it's for the muttaqi. If we have not cultured our hearts to have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what follows in the Quran after the key is the ayah containing the keys will fall on deaf ears. Most so, a heart that is like a rock, it will fall upon that and bounce off. So we need to look at ourselves. We need to ask ourselves the questions: how well do we know it? How much do we recite it? How often do we obey it? And obedience in the full, without hesitation and without any complaint. Now, just as the Bani Israel complained about their living standards in the desert and came to the city, so many Muslims left their own lands, believing that non-Muslim lands were better. This is something that especially the current generation of Muslims can relate to. The grandparent and the parent generation, specifically the grandparent generation, came from their own countries. They left their own countries, came to the West. In many instances, especially the Pakistani community, the Bangladeshi community, the Indian community of Muslims came from those lands into England, thinking this is a better place. Came to Europe, thinking it's a better place. Left their own lands. Left Muslim lands where they could hear the adhan. Left Muslim lands where there's haya, where there was shame, where the modesty in dress, where the women wore clothes that were appropriate, where the men wore clothes that were appropriate. All of this they left. Yes, we may have been poor. Yes, we may have had less. But what we had, we were happy with, we were satisfied with. And our iman was intact, and our haya was intact. But we came to the land of those who do not believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who mock Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and whose level of shame is not known. There is no level. They are completely shameless, and they continue to be more and more. And we came to those lands, and we tried to find our rizq in these lands. Rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wherever we go, we'll find it. But we should not have had that lack of tawakkul in Allah that He cannot feed us where we are, and we must go to the lands of non-Muslims. But here we came. And just that the Bani Israel, as I say, complained about their living standards in the desert when they had what was good for them. They had manna and salwa. It was good for them. That's all they needed. It was nutritious and beneficial to them. But they wanted the city life. So they entered the city and then they became astray. So with us, we left our own lands and we came here. Our grandparents came here and then they settled here. And then they brought their wives over, and then they had children here. And those children grew up in these lands, foreign and alien to their own lands, and yet they grew up in those lands and made them their own. And their own lands became foreign and alien, subhanAllah. So that's where we are now, in these lands, growing up, tainted by them, corrupted by them, polluted by them. That's where we are now. Yet it is in such lands, as I say, that we have lost our way. Each generation more lost than the previous to the Dajjalic systems in cities. We've all come here to live in cities. We've all come here to earn a lot of money. We've all come here to get prestige and honor. But in reality, we've come to a place where we've lost our iman. We've lost our way in terms of the deen. We've come to the land of the Dajjalic systems. This is where the Dajjalic systems are born, where they are developed, where they are maintained, where they are strengthened, and where they are at their strongest. And from here, they were exported over to our lands, to Muslim lands, and they are imposed there. And yet here we came, and here we continue to live within the system, the Dajjalic system, in the heart of the Dajjalic system, in the heart of the Dajjalic community. How safe can we really be? And for how long? So now in the modern age, the trap is now closing. We've been here for a while. We've been here for what, 2 generations now. And such is the punishment of Allah Ta'ala, that as the trap closes, that will be the punishment of Allah Ta'ala. We can see what is happening around us. We can see the worldwide network of the Dajjalic system. How with the pandemic, it controlled us so much. It made us compromise our own deen, standing 6 feet apart in the salah. How it compromises so much that even people were forbidden to go to the masjid. People were told to make appointments. The Qur'ans were removed from the masjids as maybe a source of infection, subhanAllah. All these things and more were done. And as a result of that, Allah Ta'aala's ghadab will be upon us because we forgot ourselves. So this is what we are being taught as one of the lines of lessons that we can learn from this ayah, just as what happened with the Bani Israel. Now we've got the trap closing. It's getting more difficult. Prices are rising. Different things are happening. Society is becoming far from being societal. Now, when Bani Israel were affected by plague, it entered the city over everyone. And as I mentioned myself earlier, we have had our pandemic, but many did not learn the lesson and even supported it. Many of the Muslims supported the pandemic narrative, and many of the Muslims supported its implication and its regulations in compromise of the deen, in compromise of the salah, in compromise of the fiqh. So do we not think this is going to anger Allah Ta'ala? I mean, Allah Ta'ala sends the punishment, we do not learn the lesson, and we actually invoke more punishment as a result of it. Now we will face other fitna. Now we will face what is to come, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent a punishment. Had we learnt the lesson, everything else would have been averted, truly, or at least for those people who had learnt the lesson. But what's happened is that the majority of the people have not. They have not learnt the lesson, and they have continued in the wake of that. So now we face other fitna, fuel price going up, food and resources increasing in price. All of this, in truth, is engineered. It's not genuine. It's not natural. It's engineered because the Dajjali forces are closing the net. So that's why all these things are happening. And many of us don't even realize that in the first place. We are being told particular stories, narratives that are not true, but they are being there because they want us to accept that. And so therefore those who are doing it are not blamed. In fact, how clever and cunning this is, those who are doing it are being seen by the rest of us as our saviors. We are turning to them, our governments, and they are the ones who are responsible. Right now, throughout the whole world practically, perhaps 99%, if not more, of the governments of the world are all in collusion with each other. They are all in collusion with each other. And above them are those who are pulling the strings of the governments. And this net is tightening. This net was well worked out. And as a result of being well worked out, it is now encompassing the entire globe of this world. And it is being tightened. So everywhere you turn, it's the same narrative. It's the same implications. It's the same rulings. It's the same restrictions that are happening for the people of every single land, every single country. To different extents, but it's all happening. So this in itself logically tells you that there must be one central thinking, planning body. And from there, the same strategies are coming out to all the different countries of the world because everybody's doing the same thing. It's like, I mean, countries, different nations have different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things. And yet everybody's doing it in the same way. They've forgotten their heritage, the way things are done by, for example, Chinese people. Chinese people are very wise people, yet there's no wisdom being applied. It's just doing what everybody else is doing. We have people in Africa. They have a different way of doing things, but in this case, they're doing it the same. There are people in different other cultures that are different cultures, Asian cultures, Pakistan, Kashmir, etc., India. We have a different way of doing things, but we're doing it the same way. The people of Russia, they have a different way of doing things, but right now they're doing it the same way. So it's interesting to note that all different nations and civilizations, races and creeds who do other things and have done historically differently to one another, which has been one of the richness of travel, that you travel to different cultures, different lands, and find different ways of doing things, different foods, different clothes, different customs. But it's surprising that in this instance, now in this age, everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's doing the same thing. So there must be one unique place or one governing body that is giving instructions to everybody, that is above the governments, that is above the governing armies and the MPs and parliaments and so on, even above kingdoms and kings and queens for whichever countries have them. And this is the ruler. This is the true ruler, this governing body. And above this governing body, in time to come, will be the Masih ad-Dajjal. And that's when the whole thing will come to light. But how many of us will understand this before it's too late, is the question. So, what is the believer to do in all of this? A firm belief in Allah Ta'ala. Although it is engineered, it is ultimately
Allah's punishment. It's his punishment. Whatever is happening, whatever is coming to happen, the price rise, etc., whatever is going to happen, the food, the shortages that are coming, whatever is going to happen, and believe me, they are coming. It is all being engineered. It is all deliberate. It can be changed. It can be prevented. It could have been prevented all along, but it's deliberately being done. Food factories are catching fire. It's amazing. So many food factories have caught fire in this last year. Why is that happening? Prices of not just food and not just fuel, but fertilizer is going up. Why is that happening? Farmers being told to cut back on their crops or destroy existing crop. Why is that happening? Existing crop that has been harvested is being destroyed, dumped, wasted. Why? Ships that are carrying cargo are being held in ports over excuses of a war with the Ukraine and Russia. Surely it cannot hold all the ships of all the world back. Yet that's what seems to be happening. So one cannot help but think that even this war in Russia with the Ukraine has been engineered, has been made to happen. And Allah knows best. But ultimately, all of this planning, all of this strategy, all of this network, despite it being there, above that network and above that governing body of this network and above the Dajjalic system, even above the Dajjal, is the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which no one can change. And that is where we as spiritually should understand. Ultimately, all of this is as a result of us forgetting. As the Bani Israel forgot or changed the word of Allah Ta'ala and became arrogant and did not remember to have tawakkul and shukr to Allah Ta'ala, so have we become. So have we become. And now it's high time for us to face that punishment, to look at the place we live in and realize that the very place we long to be in, that we came to, that our grandparents came to, thinking it was poverty where we were and it's plenitude where we are now, that very place, the city, is going to become a place of punishment. It's going to become a place of misery. It's going to become a place of want and need and destitution. So our response should be to make hijrah out to remote places, to remove ourselves from the cities, to make plans to get out. Because once the cities collapse, then we will have chaos. We will certainly have shortage of food, and we will be desperate for protection. Our safety may not be as common as it is now. So that would be something else for the believer to do. So number one, to affirm belief in Allah Ta'ala, to return to where we should be. As the Yahud, the Bani Israel, the Yahud of that time were told, have humility and have shukr. We need to return to our humility and our shukr. If not immediately being able to leave, then we should become independent of the system. So whilst we're still in the cities and not able to leave or not ready to leave just yet, then you need to start to become independent of the system. Start to grow your own food. Start to have connections with farms. Start to work together as a community and help each other out. These kinds of things we need to do. And as a result of that, stop going to the system. Stop using the superstores. Stop using the chain stores, etc. Start to use just your local shops, your local groceries, and start to grow your own. Start to become independent. Look at what is the system and try to come away from that. Build a jama'ah, very important. Build a jama'ah so that we are together. We are building a jama'ah based upon the Dini principles. An Amir, a Shura, people of taqwa, people of ihsan, all working together. People of piety, righteousness, working together. I want to just look at a hadith that helps us have some more hope for what is to come, because I don't want to leave us in just a despondent state. There is always hope, especially for the believer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never leave the believer on to his own device or her own device. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help will always be there. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عجبا لأمر المؤمن إن أمره كله خير وليس ذاك لأحد إلا للمؤمن إن أصابته سراء شكر فكان خيرا له وإن أصابته ضراء صبر فكان خيرا له. Sadaqallahu. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, wondrous or amazing is the affair of the believer, for that is good for him in every matter. And this is not the case with anyone except the believer. If he is happy, then he thanks Allah, and thus that is good for him. And if he is harmed, then he shows patience, and thus that is good for him. So this hadith is very important. Wondrous is the affair of the believer, for that is good for him in every matter, and this is not the case with anyone except the believer. If he is happy, then he thanks Allah, and thus that is good for him in that. And if he is harmed, then he shows sabr, patience, and thus that is good for him in that. So, whether in the city or hijrah, the believer will face challenges. Whether you remain in the city or do the hijrah, and many people think if we do the hijrah, we'll be out of the, yes, we'll be out of the sin, and that is important. You'll be out of the oppression, you'll be out of the harm and the danger, yes, and you'll be out of the system of Dajjal, yes. However, those who can't leave the city for a genuine reason and are delayed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of them as well. They, so long as they are believers, will face challenges in the city, and those who do the hijrah and think that they're out of the fitan, you will also still continue to have challenges. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in this hadith through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if you're a believer, then whether you're inadvertently stuck in the city and unable to get out for a time, or you actually make it through the barakah of Allah ta'ala on hijrah, you will still have imtihan, you will still have challenges. That's something to understand. However, whilst in the good times, the believers will show shukr. So if you have some good times in the city, you will show shukr. And if you have good times in the hijrah, you will show shukr. When in difficult times, believers will show sabr. You will have difficult times in the city, show sabr. You will have difficult times in the hijrah, show sabr. Do not blame the hijrah, or blame the amir, or blame the shura, or blame one another, or say if we only were better back in the city, like the people of Musa al-Islam did when they came to the river, or and afterwards when they were in the desert, they decided to make the calf. And what did they say? It was better back in Egypt. It was better there. We had the things that we had. Okay, there was some difficulty, but at least we were safe and we had abundant food and so on and so on. They were like that. Let us not become like that. There will be difficult times. This dunya isn't Jannah. This dunya is a prison. It is for the believers a prison. It is for us a difficulty. It is for us an imtihan. So there will be difficult times. But those difficult times are a means for us, number one, to show sabr. Number two, through that sabr, to gain the help of Allah Ta'ala. And number three, it is our tarbiyah. It is our development. And number four is a source, therefore, of reward, of ajr. This is how we earn our Jannah, inshallah. However, for the believer, ultimately, it will also be a case of expiation of past sins as well. So when we have difficult times, not only do we gain reward and develop tarbiyah, but the sins of the past will be an expiation. So in there is there wisdom as to why living in cities, if we're truly genuinely sorry and remorseful, then ghadab may come, but it will act as an expiation for us, and that we should welcome. We should welcome that, because we do not want to meet Allah with the sins of our neglect and the sins of our forgetfulness. We do not want to meet Allah Ta'ala with that. So better that a little bit of taklif in this dunya takes away those sins, and we meet Allah Ta'ala with a clean record. And that can be done in this life. And if there is to be something, then first thing is to make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the depths of the night. That will relieve us of the difficulties in the cities as well, in any case, of the difficulties of the ghadab of Allah ta'ala. That will help us, the tawbah. And the second thing then is that when the difficulties do come, even if they're reduced, and inshallah they will be if we make tawbah, then there will be difficulties we can handle, difficulties we can experience and overcome, inshallah, but they will still act as an expiation of our sins. Finally, so in conclusion, I would like to ask that we should change ourselves. Spiritually speaking, we should change ourselves to be from amongst those believers who can face good or bad and yet still earn the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala. In the good, we give shukr. In the bad, we have sabr. In both cases, we understand this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there can only be good in it. And if there is something from what our own hands have done, if we've done something wrong and there is a divine retribution, then that is from the wisdom of Allah Ta'ala, but it's also from the mercy of Allah Ta'ala. Because if a person is a believer and maintains that belief in their hearts, maintains themselves as believers, then whatever comes from Allah Ta'ala, good or harmful, is actually truly all good. That is what we learn from this hadith. Why Rasulullah begins the hadith saying that it's a wondrous, he's amazed, it's an amazing it's an amazing thing that a believer, whether he's going through good or bad, it's all good for him. That's what is being said in this hadith. Rasulullah has given us, he's saying that he is amazed. He says, I am amazed at the state of a believer, that when he's got good, he gives shukr, and that's good for him. And when he's got bad, he has sabr, and that's good for him. In both cases, it's good for him. And why? So long as he's a believer. So long as she has love for Allah Ta'ala, tawakkul in Allah Ta'ala, and understands that good comes from Allah Ta'ala. So there may be a little bit of difficulty, but in that is expiation of sin, in that is the earning of Allah Ta'ala's pleasure, in that is our tarbiyah, in that is the earning of Jannah, inshallah. But all of that because we need to change ourselves. We need to be in that state of being mu'min, where our good earns us and our bad earns us. Our bad state earns us, our good state earns us, but on the basis of shukr and sabr and tawbah. This is how the mu'min should be. Our days of difficulty are coming. They've already started. They're going to get worse. And we need to be able to pass through those days with the sabr and the shukr that is required of us as believers. Do not concern yourselves with others who are less than that. And Allah Ta'ala truly knows who is who, but we can understand from the basic fiqh understanding, a Muslim is different to a non-Muslim. And amongst the Muslims, those who are connected to Allah Ta'ala are different to those who are not. And amongst those who are connected to Allah Ta'ala, those who have the connection to Allah Ta'ala such they cry in their prayers, they recite the Quran, they are practicing their deen, they love their deen, and they love one another for the sake of their deen, and they are together, those who are believers, strengthening one another, the men and women of the deen. Those are different to the people who are aware of what they should do, but they're negligent of it. And ultimately, Allah Ta'ala will be the judge of all of us, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand and to benefit from this session, inshallah, and to be prepared and to be aware of what is to come in the life of this world.